Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I'm your host, Karen Wilson. Today, we're digging into a topic that comes up for many families, picky eating. And we're going to discuss how occupational therapy can be used to decrease picky eating behaviors and lead to better mealtime experiences for the whole family. My guest today is Dr. Ellie Bendetson. She is a pediatric occupational therapist in Los Angeles. We will also be joined by Leah Hiller, also a pediatric occupational therapist and former guest on this podcast. Let's get started.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Ellie and Leah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
This is exciting. It's my first time that we've all three talked together. Although I know you've had conversations with Ellie, I've had many conversations with you. So I'm glad that we can all share.
I'm excited too. And Leah, you were actually one of the first guests on the podcast. I was looking back, it was episode 9, and I think we're at episode 129 right now. So I'm going to have to put a link to that one because that was an introduction to occupational therapy for people who really didn't know what it was. And so we've come full circle. Now we're talking about related topic, and I'm excited to have you both here.
And I said this to you before, but this is really exciting for me in my practice because usually our conversations are really broad about OT. And when you asked me this question about picky eating, it was really like laser focused. I could tell that you were getting this question a lot. And I knew immediately OT is super broad. This isn't my thing, but Dr. Ellie in my practice has, this topic has been her passion since she was in her residency. It's just like who she is, what she talks about. So I was really excited to kind of be here more to just sit back and listen to hear what she has to say. I love talking about OT, but when it comes to this aspect of it, like Ellie's your expert.
I love that. And I reached out to you on behalf of parents who frequently say that picky eaters at home is impacting so many aspects of their lives. And it's interesting because although picky eating is often reported by parents of neurodivergent kids, picky eating is a pretty common behavior in early childhood, isn't it?
Yeah, I love statistics. So I think it's 25 to 40% of kids across the board present with picky eating. And then you're right, it goes up with neurodiversity. It goes up, I believe, since our COVID pandemic, there's a lot more kind of environmental, social, emotional impacts. So you are correct. It is something that is hitting families and kids all over the place.
Right. And I feel like there's no universally accepted definition of picky eating. How do you define it or describe it?
Broadly,
yes.
This is where I focus on. It's become so common that it is one of the baseline questions I ask when parents call. How's feeding or eating going? And how's sleep? Mm-hmm. So I would say this is up there with the big two. And if those things are challenges, it's going to affect every other aspect of what we do. And for me, the definition is just participation. Like, how are they participating in feeding?
Yeah, I think the thing that makes picky eating such a challenge is that food and mealtime is so complicated.
Right.
And so there are so many different ways to kind of tackle it, but there are also so many things that may be the cause, and it may shift from day to day. So I think the definition is really just limited food variety. And so there's, food selectivity, which is kind of a term that just means one or more food groups that are limited. But really, again, the definition is always changing, and that's what makes it so complicated.
I can absolutely see that. And I think the food selectivity is what comes to mind for a lot of parents when I see them, and they will frequently say things like, oh, she will only eat carbs, or he will not eat any vegetables. And so that can create a lot of distress for parents who are concerned about their kids getting, dietary variety, getting enough iron, getting enough zinc, getting enough fiber.
Yeah. And there's such a big cultural impact as well, because there are certain cultures that maybe are really heavily reliant on vegetables. I know I grew up vegetarian, and so I have a really wide variety of veggies in my life. But as far as proteins, I've tried meat and it tastes really weird to me. So it is not only dependent on the situation, but you have to be so client centered and so aware of what is this family eating, and what do they really want their child to love and enjoy.
And I think that's what makes Ellie so good at this, actually, is the fact that she's not one of those people who's like, oh, I eat everything and I always did. And this is a thing. I actually think I'll say I am not a picky eater. And I think it's the reason that Ellie is the best therapist for this, because she can say like, hey, I live in my dietary situation is like, I don't eat meat. I never have. I never plan to. There are other things that I have lunch with her almost every day. I can tell you there's other things that just don't work in her diet, but also she gets it. And she's found ways to both participate in like the social experience of eating and feeding and also have like all the nutrition and health she needs. And I know that I think she comes to families with such like a place of understanding that like, hey, it's not going to look the same for your family as it does for another family. And that's absolutely okay. And it feels like nothing is overwhelming. Families will come and say, my kid actually has 3 foods that they eat. They're all beige. There's 3 of them. And they're not exaggerating. That's it. And Ellie can say, okay, we'll start there. We'll build from it. And I think it's just because she really like, it's okay. Like wherever she is, no one's going to gasp or judge or question.
Well, I also think, thank you. I also think I have the privilege of working with so many families like this. And so I have the privilege of understanding that it's not necessarily case by case. There are so many families that are struggling with this. And we've also seen success with a lot of kids and a lot of families. It's a really isolating thing. And so families come to you saying, we are the only ones struggling with this. I am too terrified to bring it up to my friends. I am too terrified to bring it up to my doctor because they're going to think I'm a bad parent. When truly everybody is having this issue. And in our parent group, my first question is, what's your name and what food do you hate? And you'd be surprised. People will say, some people are, I don't like eating bugs. I'm like, I understand that. But some people will say, I hate eating bread. And it'll start this big discussion around what are the things that we don't like? Why don't we like them? And are they functional? I hate zucchini. I don't have to like zucchini, but I do have to make sure that I have another vegetable or another, starch that I'm having in place of that.
Right. And it sounds like it's important to meet families where they are, and obviously taking into consideration their family environment and their culture. And what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Ellie, is that those early experiences play an important role when you talk about growing up in a family where you were a vegetarian. What are some factors that impact picky eating and other difficult mealtime behaviors?
It's a great question. So it's a big question. And the nice thing that I think actually makes OT a really good fit for picky eating is we take a really holistic approach. So we look at mealtime and we break it down into what is happening and what is impacting the child and the family and the environment. So there's genetics. So some people are just super tasters. They have stronger taste buds. There's also certain genes that make bitter taste a little stronger. There are environmental influences. So what is the child being exposed to? Also in utero, when you're getting exposed to certain foods, also through breastfeeding, there's some science there that shows that has an impact. But really, when we look at a lot of kids, and I focus a lot on the sensory processing aspect, we have kids who have sensory differences tend to have lower body awareness, and kids, period, have lower body awareness. They've had less experience and less time to understand their bodies. And I like to say that our mouth is like a dark black cave. Unless you're sitting in front of a mirror, watching your mouth chew, you have no clue what's happening in there. And adults, we have, 20, 30, 40 years of experience chewing and using our tongue and knowing where the food goes. And that allows us to eat safely. But kids, they don't necessarily have that. And then when you have kids who have, lower body awareness or some motor planning issues, they put a food in their mouth that's solid and it shatters and it goes everywhere. And their little nervous system says, what is happening? And they start to, panic, whether it's, on a conscious level or a subconscious level. So I often find that there can be some oral motor issues. So just some challenges manipulating foods in their mouth, but also having that lower awareness makes eating hard. And for kids, can be really challenging to do things that feel so hard. And habits get ingrained pretty quick, and we eat 3 or more times a day. So it's a good opportunity for bad and good habits to stick.
That really helps to understand, how big the issue is and how it can, picky eating can be impacted by so many different things. And it sounds like that also means that you need to target it very differently depending on some of those factors that might be playing a role. So we know that picky eating is going to impact mealtime for families. It's going to impact whether families can go out to dinner or have meals with extended family. How can OT help decrease those picky eating behaviors and improve the mealtime experience?
Well, so when we do assessments, you'd kind of laugh and look at our reports because it'll say feeding and it breaks it down into every little step. So we look at oral motor skills. Is their tongue doing what it needs to be doing at their developmental stage? Their lips, their teeth. Then we look at fine motor skills. Are they able to easily, manipulate a fork, bring food to their mouth? That's really important because if there's an issue with a food, we want the child to be able to safely get it out of their mouth. And if they can't, they're going to avoid that food. We look at the sensory challenges. OTs are really kind of positioned to be able to focus on those sensory pieces. We look at behaviors. So looking at, what's the best kind of parent reaction? How do we help really form that connection and the rapport between the parent and the child? What time does the kid have to be eating? How long should the meal be? What are the expectations? And then just developmentally understanding what the child kind of can be responsible for on their own versus the parent responsibility. And I think OTs have we have a really valuable kind of space because we look at all the things and we put it all together and we're able to tackle one thing at a time. Gross motor too, looking at posture. How are they sitting in their chair? It is complicated, but OT is pretty complicated. So I think we get to work through all those things.
And I'm going to add one other piece here. Ellie just went through every single aspect of what we do when we look at the kid. But Ellie did something really interesting when she was first starting out in this picky eating journey, I'll say, is she realized, and also in evidence, it's shown that supporting the parents and the families around picky eaters is so crucial. And so I think COVID was a factor as well, of course. But what Ellie did is she created a group for parents of picky eaters.
Mm.
And all of the information that she has, that she looks at, was really focused around the kid. And she realized like it wasn't good enough for the OT and the kid to be going through this process.
Mm-hmm.
So the other big thing that I think has made a huge difference in the progress we see in these kids is that the parents can also participate in her feeding group. And it's specifically geared towards the parents of picky eaters. And it is, I'd say, part support group and just part like information, part like lecture where she's just sharing this information. But what we found is the families that participate in it, there are so many factors, not just going on with the kid, but also with the family. And being able to address that, just, it's like it propels everything forward so much faster. And I feel like it makes just really lasting changes, not just for the kids, but really for the families. So yeah, I guess in addition to all the things going on with the complexity within that child, there's also so much complexity within the family system that really makes this unique. Like we don't see that with fine motor skills, right? Like it doesn't matter your dad's experience with fine motor skills when you're dealing with your own, but when you're talking about feeding, it's just so central.
And that really speaks to the environment playing a significant role, right? I think that's something you said, Dr. Ellie, initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's also, feeding is emotional. We've had parents that come in and just say their goal for their child is they want them to love to eat. Mm-hmm. Eating is huge. We have holidays around eating. We have family dinners. We have birthday parties. Food is a big, big, big part of our culture. And I think there's a lot of, there's parents that have their own eating challenges from childhood or adulthood. And so handling everything with caution and understanding that everyone is trying their best is really important to find success and to help parents feel really confident and empowered.
So Ellie, tell me about the Making Mealtimes Matter program. Is that what Leah was talking about when she talked about supporting parents?
Yeah. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to go back kind of like a couple years at this point.
Yes.
When I was in grad school, and I do have to give some shout outs to a couple of students that I went to grad school with, we had a class where we had to develop a program. And I, at the time, was doing a field work at a pediatric clinic. And I would see kid after kid for picky eating. And a lot of the kids were somewhere on the autism spectrum, but some of them were not, or some of them were kind of awaiting diagnosis. And parent after parent would say, I am a bad parent. And I just wanted to kind of grab them and say, I'm going to connect you with my other parents. I want you to get together and have coffee and cry and laugh and yell. But of course, HIPAA, it has an impact there. So we developed in grad school a program, just kind of like a bare bones program that was targeting parents to be able to get together, vent about feeding, talk about the emotional challenges, and get introduced to kind of the basics of picky eating. Mm-hmm. And in 2020/2021, I did my doctoral residency at Hiller Therapy, and Leah allowed me to really flesh out this program. So we've now gone through 3 different cycles of it, but it is a 6-week program to introduce parents to the very basics of picky eating, kind of the best practices. And then most of the session is just group-based problem solving and talking about the strategy. So if we introduce kind of a concept, then I open it up to the group. I say, have you done this before? Do you think this is a fit? What do you think about this? What challenges are coming up? And I find that parents being able to help each other is so empowering. Parents will say, oh, I went through this a year ago. Try this. And we always say in therapy, as much as we want to give the answers, we really want to help people to kind of come up with the answers. And I find that this is a really cool way to do that.
And it sounds like there are many types of strategies and tips that parents can learn. because I just think about parents who say, I just want to widen my child's food choices, right? So that they're not so limited. But then also, when you think about the cultural aspect, it's really about creating a positive social experience around mealtime. So there's so many pieces that come into play.
Right. And I always try to tell parents, as soothing as it can be, I am a picky eater. I live with a picky eater. We are healthy. We are happy. We are well fed. Your child will likely kind of grow, not necessarily out of these challenges, but will figure out ways to problem solve them. Now, of course, there are circumstances where it can be a little bit more extreme. But I like to tell parents, take a step back. And our first step is really just to help your child break that kind of bad habit loop and have a more positive experience around food.
And I know that the group would be, so helpful to so many families. So if people are listening and they're saying, I would love a couple tips, a couple strategies that maybe you've heard that have worked for families that have been in your group. Could you speak to any of those or a couple of those?
Yeah. So one of the approaches that we kind of touch on in our group, and we really just do kind of I just really introduce it as a concept, is the SOS approach, which is the sequential oral sensory approach. And essentially this approach focuses less on specific foods and more on giving the child the skills to eat. So instead of focusing on, can they eat this carrot? We want to look at, can they really chew? Can they use their mouth for what they want it to do? Can they, is their sensory body, ready to eat? All of those things. So what I'll say is having some time in the home where you're just playing with food is a really great approach. So maybe take an hour on the weekend and pull out 10 different kinds of vegetables or something, or finding some different kinds of foods and just encourage your child to interact with it. I like to have, little food picks and different kinds of mashers and putting things in plastic bags if your child is not ready to eat them, but doing different kinds of exploratory activities and allowing your child to understand that they can do it. And the food is not as scary as maybe their brains are telling them. And then slowly helping them to recognize, oh, maybe, I have a little potato on my plate. Do you want to try a bite, or do you want to cut it up for me? And just getting them involved with the food so that they're, I find that a lot of children, their immediate way to problem solve something is to avoid it. That makes sense developmentally. But we want to help children to understand that, yes, they can avoid something, but also there's another way they can learn about it. They can become scientists. And that is just a skill for life.
Right. And I love that scientific method aspect of it, because I think kids are just naturally curious. And again, involving them in the process and having this kind of multimodal approach to feeling it and playing with it, interacting with it, cutting it. I can see that being impactful for so many children. Now, how much does parent modeling play a role?
It's a good question. I mean, I think there's certain things, if you're thinking about like feeding habits and things like that, the idea of force feeding is kind of a model that we want to avoid at all costs. I always say, there's no necessarily bad way to feed your child except for force feeding and except for not feeding them. But also the reason I ask parents, what's a food you hate, is because I want parents to understand that you're along for the ride.
Right.
I'm likely going to tell your child to have you do some experiments too.
Right.
So I've worked with kids before where I've said, your homework is to go home and ask everyone in your family for 2 foods that they hate. And they come back and they're so excited. My mom hates olives. And then we come up with, how do we get mom to explore the olives? And one, it's normalizing, but also it allows for the parents to model what it looks like to explore a new food. and to be silly about it, and maybe to show the kid that the parent is not ready for it right now.
Right.
And it also, I think kids are really smart, and they can really see when a parent is faking it sometimes.
Right.
And so finding foods that you hate and telling your child that they are not the only picky eater in the house.
Right.
It's a good way to model it.
Yes.
And then also I think words are really important. And so I always like to compare foods. I say, we are superheroes and these foods are going to help make our muscles strong, or we get to eat these things, or we, get to try. Maybe if it's not eat, we get to explore. A lot of that can come from modeling.
Right. And you talked about, involving kids in the process, whether it be, reporting back about foods that other family members don't like. And it seems that cooking itself is a great process, because when kids are involved in the process of preparing food, whether it be putting a salad together or, helping put food in the pan or stirring, a dish, it seems that would be also helpful in getting kids on board for eating.
Yeah, definitely. I think involving your kid with cooking, but also taking it a step further, have them help you make the grocery list, have them come to the supermarket and do a scavenger hunt to find, a veggie that's green to put in the bag, or a potato that has, 10 spots or something like that. Gets them more excited about the food.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think cooking is a great way to get kids involved.
Now, we're actually running out of time. This is such a great conversation. And, we mentioned, and you talked about the benefits of cooking and, getting that grocery list and being involved in that process. And it makes me think about the work that you all do with cooking, because it not only helps with picky eating, it seems, but it also will help, have a double benefit, because it really helps kids with executive functioning struggles as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about cooking, it almost tackles every executive functioning area. There's time management, there's organization, there's planning, task initiation. Following a recipe is an amazing way to work on kind of that step-by-step instruction. And then also there is that aspect of flexible thinking and problem solving. Mm-hmm. If this food is not turning out the way you want it to, how can we figure out what to do with it? I think cooking is an amazing family-centered way to tackle a lot of those challenges.
Wonderful. And you and Leah have such great programs that you work with, and great work that you're doing with families. If parents are listening and they're interested in your Making Mealtimes Matter program, or your Chef's program, which is your cooking program, or other programs for their kiddos, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
You can visit our website at hillertherapy.com. But also you can just reach out to Leah, Leah, at Hiller Therapy, HILLER therapy.com, or me, and I'm Ellie, ELLIE, at hillertherapy.com. We love to talk about these things, and we really feel like groups are such a helpful way to make it fun and see a lot of effect.
I agree. And one more question. Are your groups in person or virtual? Because I know a lot of parents listening might say, how do we access these groups? Do I have to be there in person?
The parent group is virtual.
Wonderful.
So we run it once a week in the evening, and it's only 6 weeks. And all of our other groups are in person. Our Executive Chefs program is not currently running, but we are in the development of creating a new executive functioning program, which is being created by our new doctoral resident. So we're doing all the things.
You're doing all the things. I mean, you tackle so much. Like I said, the picky eating, the fine motor skills, the sensory issues that many of the kiddos that we work with are struggling with. I can't thank you enough for all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellie, for being here. I really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you heard, please let us know. Reach out to me at drkiwilson@childnexus.com. And you could also leave a review. That helps other people find us as well. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.